The courtroom on Nexus Prime was the largest building Commander Zektar had ever seen. 12 different alien species sat as judges, their strange forms casting weird shadows under the bright lights. The blue-scaled Vorthan warrior shifted in his chair, feeling the weight of 300 watching eyes upon him. Captain Lisa Harper sat in the front row of the gallery. The human woman wore her military uniform with quiet pride. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her green eyes never left the alien commander who was about to speak. She had volunteered to attend this hearing, though her superiors had warned her it might be difficult to listen to. The head judge, a tall creature with 6 arms and golden skin, spoke in the common galactic language. Commander Zektar of the Vorthan Empire, you have agreed to testify about your experiences during the Third Galactic War. Please begin with your first encounter with human forces. Zektar's throat made a clicking sound as he cleared it. When he spoke, his voice was deep and rough, like gravel being poured into a metal bucket. I had been a soldier for 300 years when I received orders to attack the human colonies in the Outer Rim. My commanders told me it would be easy work. Humans were new to space, they said, young and weak. The alien commander's clawed hands gripped the edge of the witness stand. I commanded 40 ships of the line. Each one carried enough firepower to level a city. We had fought the Krell Empire, the Spider Queens of Andromeda, and the Machine Collective. We had never lost a battle. Duh. Lisa Harper felt her jaw tighten. She knew what was coming next. The target was a colony called New Denver, Zektar continued. Intelligence reports said it had maybe 2 million humans, mostly farmers and miners. They had 12 old patrol ships and some orbital defense platforms. My tactical computer calculated we would win in less than 4 hours. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Representatives from various species whispered to each other. The idea of such overwhelming odds was familiar to them all. In galactic warfare, superior numbers and technology always won. We dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of their system, Zektar said. Standard military procedure, we broadcast. Surrender demands on all frequencies. Most species see our fleet and give up immediately. It saves lives on both sides. The alien commander paused, his yellow eyes growing distant. The humans sent back a single message. It was from their defense commander, a male named Jake Morrison. He said 3 words, "Come and take it." Several judges leaned forward in their seats. This was not how civilized warfare was supposed to work. I thought it was bravado, Zektar explained. Young species often talk big before they understand the reality of their situation. We began our approach. Standard attack formation. We would destroy their orbital defenses first, then demand surrender again. If they refused, we would bombard their cities until they came to their senses. Lisa Harper remembered reading about Colonel Jake Morrison in the military academy. He'd become something of a legend among human forces, not because he had won an impossible battle, but because of how he had fought it. The human ships came out to meet us, Zektar continued. 12 small vessels against 40 of ours. They should have stayed behind their orbital platforms where they had some protection. Instead, they charged straight at us. The Vorthan commander's scaled skin seemed to darken. At first, I thought they were trying to ram us. Suicide attacks are not unknown in warfare, though they are usually saved for desperate final moments. But these humans were not trying to die gloriously. They were trying to win. He turned to look directly at Captain Harper. Your Colonel Morrison split his tiny force into 4 groups. Each group attacked a different part of our formation. They used their ship's smaller size and speed to dart between our vessels, forcing us to choose our targets carefully to avoid hitting our own ships. The alien's voice grew quieter. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was how they communicated during the battle. We intercepted their radio transmissions. They were not shouting orders or crying out in fear. They were calm, professional. They called out targeting information and tactical updates like they were discussing the weather. Zektar stood up from his chair and began to pace. One of their pilots, a female named Amy Rodriguez, had her ship's engine destroyed by our plasma cannons. Her vessel was venting atmosphere and spinning out of control. By all logic, she should have ejected and hoped for rescue. The courtroom was completely silent now. Even the translator devices had stopped their quiet humming. Instead, she used her ship's remaining maneuvering thrusters to aim herself at our flagship. My flagship. As she approached, she transmitted a message to her commander. She said, "Tell my daughter I kept my promise." Then she rammed us at full speed. Several of the judges made sounds of shock or dismay. Ramming attacks were considered barbaric by most galactic civilizations. The explosion crippled our main weapons array, Zektar continued. But that was not what shook me. What shook me was the way the other human pilots reacted. They did not cry out in rage or grief. They simply noted that target priority had shifted, and continued their attack. The alien commander sat back down heavily. We fought for 18 hours in space before we finally destroyed or disabled all of their ships. 18 hours against 12 vessels that should not have lasted 18 minutes. But even that was not the end. Lisa Harper knew what came next. Every human military officer learned about the defense of New Denver in their first year of training. We moved in to attack their orbital platforms. We discovered something that changed everything, Zektar said. The platforms were not just weapons, they were decoys. The real defenses were hidden among their space stations, mining facilities, and even civilian ships. The aliens' yellow eyes seemed to glow brighter. Every piece of metal in that system had been turned into a weapon. Cargo containers filled with explosives. Mining lasers converted into military-grade beam weapons. Even their hospital ships carried missile launchers. He looked around the courtroom, making eye contact with representatives from a dozen different species. We had prepared to fight a standard colonial defense force. Instead, we found ourselves fighting an entire civilization that had decided to go to war. The head judge raised one of his 6 hands. "Commander, are you saying that the civilian population was involved in combat operations?" Zektar nodded slowly. "Not just involved, leading them. Their military officers took orders from school teachers and shop owners who had better ideas about how to hurt us. Children carried ammunition. Elderly civilians operated weapon systems. It was not an army we were fighting, it was a people." Captain Harper felt a chill run down her spine. She had always known humans were different from other species. Hearing it described from an enemy's perspective made it seem almost frightening. By the time we secured orbital space, we had lost 6 ships and suffered damage to 15 others, Zektar continued. Our casualties were 3 times higher than our worst-case projections. And we had not even reached the planet's surface yet. The alien commander's voice dropped to almost a whisper. That was when we realized that everything we thought we knew about warfare was wrong. The humans were not fighting to win a battle. They were fighting to teach us a lesson. And the lesson was this: attacking humans costs more than you can afford to pay. The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs and conversations. The judges called for order. But it took several minutes for the noise to die down. Zektar sat quietly, waiting for the room to settle. When silence returned, he spoke one final sentence that would haunt everyone present for years to come. And that was just the beginning. The second day of testimony began with the courtroom packed even fuller than before. Word had spread throughout Nexus Prime about the Vorthan commander's shocking revelations. Representatives from species across the galaxy had come to hear what else he might reveal about human warfare. Captain Lisa Harper returned to her seat in the front row. She had spent the previous evening reading military reports about New Denver, preparing herself for what Zektar might say next. The official records were disturbing enough. She wondered if the aliens' version would be worse. Commander Zektar looked older today. The blue scales on his face seemed duller, and his yellow eyes carried a weight that had not been there the day before. When the head judge asked him to continue his testimony, the alien warrior took a long moment before speaking. After we secured orbital space around New Denver, my commanders were eager to begin the ground assault, Zektar said. We had lost more ships than expected, but we still had overwhelming superiority. 34 combat vessels against a single planet. The outcome was certain. The alien commander's claws scraped against the witness stand. We began by bombing their military installations from orbit. Standard procedure: communication centers, weapon factories, troop barracks, everything that intelligence had identified as strategically important. He paused, his throat making that clicking sound again. The humans did not respond as expected. Usually, civilian populations flee from combat zones. They seek shelter in safe areas, far from military targets. The humans of New Denver did the opposite. Several judges exchanged confused glances. This went against every principle of civilized behavior they knew. Instead of running away from the bombing, they ran toward it, Zektar continued. Every time we destroyed a military facility, hundreds of civilians would arrive within hours. They brought tools, equipment, supplies. They would rebuild the facility in a different location, usually underground. The alien's voice grew quieter. We bombed their main communications center 4 times. Each time, they rebuilt it stronger than before. By the 4th bombing, they had moved it into their children's school. When we hesitated to target a school, they began putting military equipment in hospitals, museums, and religious buildings. Captain Harper felt her stomach twist. She knew this was true from the historical records, but hearing it described made it sound almost monstrous. Our intelligence officers assured us this was desperation, Zektar said, a sign that their resistance was breaking down. They recommended we proceed with the ground invasion. 100,000 Vorthan soldiers against 2 million human civilians. Most of those civilians were farmers, miners, and shop workers with no military training. The alien commander stood up and began pacing again. We landed our troops at 12 different sites around their largest city. Standard invasion. Doctrine calls for overwhelming force at key points, then rapid expansion to control the entire population center. He stopped pacing and turned to face the courtroom. The first landing site was a shopping district in the city's northern section. My soldiers expected to face scattered resistance from poorly armed civilians. Instead, they found themselves in the middle of a carefully planned ambush. Dar's yellow eyes seemed to glow brighter. Every building had been converted into a fortress. Every window was a gun position. Every doorway was a trap. The humans had spent months preparing for our arrival, and they had turned their own city into a weapon designed to kill us. The alien's claws extended unconsciously as he continued. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was the humans themselves. They fought like no species I had ever encountered. When my soldiers would wound one of them, 2 more would appear to drag their comrade to safety. When we cornered a group of them, they would detonate explosives rather than surrender. Several judges made sounds of dismay. Such tactics were considered war crimes by most galactic civilizations. At the second landing site, my forces encountered a human female named Betty Walsh, Zektar said. According to our intelligence, she was a school teacher with no military experience. She was 63 years old and walked with a cane because of an old injury. The alien commander's voice became strained. This elderly school teacher had organized the entire civilian population in her district. She had turned playgrounds into weapon workshops. She had trained children to carry messages between fighting positions. She had converted the school cafeteria into a field hospital and the gymnasium into an ammunition depot. Lisa Harper recognized the name from her academy studies. Betty Walsh had become one of the most famous civilian heroes of the war, though the full details of her actions had been classified for decades. When my soldiers surrounded the school, they expected her to surrender, Zektar continued. Instead, she appeared at the main entrance carrying a white flag. My commander thought she was ready to give up. He approached to accept her surrender. Courtroom was completely silent. Even the ambient noise from the building's air circulation system seemed to have stopped. The white flag was not a surrender banner, Zektar said quietly. It was a signal to her people. When my commander came within range, every window in the school building erupted with gunfire. My commander and 12 of his soldiers died in the first 3 seconds. The alien's scaled skin seemed to darken, but Betty Walsh did not try to escape. She stood in that doorway and continued to wave her flag, directing her people's fire, until one of my snipers killed her. Even then, the resistance continued for 6 more hours. Zektar sat back down heavily. We fought for 3 days to control. That one school building, 3 days against untrained civilians led by an elderly teacher. When we finally secured it, We found that they had been using the basement to manufacture explosives and the upper floors to coordinate attacks across the entire city. The alien commander looked directly at Captain Harper. Your people do not fight like soldiers. They fight like a force of nature. Every human civilian we encountered seemed willing to die rather than accept defeat. More disturbing, they seemed capable of making tactical decisions that our trained officers could not predict. He turned back to address the full courtroom. At the third landing site, we faced a human male named Ben Parker. He was a maintenance worker at the local water treatment plant. No military training, no combat experience. He was supposed to be one of the easiest targets on the planet. Zektar's voice grew bitter. Parker had spent 2 months before our arrival converting the entire city's water system into a weapon. He had placed explosives in key locations, rerouted water flow through military positions, and somehow managed to flood 3 of our landing zones simultaneously. The alien's claws scraped against the metal stand. When we tried to capture him, we discovered that he had booby-trapped every pipe, valve, and access tunnel in the system. It took us 8 hours to advance 50 meters through his maze of traps and ambushes. When we finally cornered him, he was sitting calmly at his control station, still adjusting water pressure to flood our positions. Several judges were taking notes frantically. This kind of improvised warfare was unlike anything in their military histories. Parker surrendered without a fight when we reached him, Zektar continued. He smiled at us and said he had done what he needed to do. Then he told us that every other city on the planet had maintenance workers just like him, and they had all learned from his example. The alien commander's voice dropped to a whisper. That was when I realized we were not fighting an army. We were not even fighting a government. We were fighting an entire species that had decided to go to war. Every human, from the youngest child to the oldest adult, had become a soldier in their own way. He looked around the courtroom one more time, and they were winning.
The room
erupted in shocked conversations. Representatives from dozens of species talked rapidly among themselves, trying to process what they had heard. The head judge called for order. But it took several minutes for quiet to return. When the noise finally died down, Zektar spoke one final sentence that sent chills through everyone present. And we still had not seen what they were really capable of. The third day of testimony brought even larger crowds to the courtroom. News of Commander Zektar's shocking revelations had spread across the galaxy. Military officers from every major species had traveled to Nexus Prime to hear what else the Vorthan commander might reveal about human warfare. Captain Lisa Harper arrived early and found her usual seat in the front row. She had spent the night reading classified reports that her security clearance allowed her to access. What she had learned made her understand why Zektar looked so haunted. The truth about New Denver was worse than most people knew. Commander? Zektar entered the courtroom looking even more tired than before. His blue scales had lost almost all their color, and his yellow eyes seemed dimmer. When he took his place at the witness stand, he moved like a much older being than his 3 centuries would suggest. The head judge called the session to order and asked Zektar to continue his testimony. The alien commander sat quietly for a long moment, as if gathering strength for what he was about to say. On the 4th day of fighting at New Denver, something changed. Zektar began. We had been receiving regular reports from our other forces throughout the sector. Suddenly, those reports stopped coming. The alien's claws gripped the edge of the witness stand. At first, we thought it was communication problems. Combat can damage relay stations and disrupt signals. But as hours passed with no contact, my intelligence officers began to worry. Paused, his throat making that familiar clicking sound. Then we started receiving distress calls, not from our enemies, but from our own bases. Any fighting were reporting attacks. Supply depots were exploding. Communication centers were going offline. Transport ships were disappearing. Several judges leaned forward in their seats. This was information that had never been made public before. The attacks were happening everywhere at once, Zektar continued. 17 different star systems, 43 separate installations, all within a 6-hour period. It was impossible. The humans at New Denver were trapped on their planet. They had no ships, no way to coordinate such widespread attacks. And the alien commander stood up and began his familiar pacing. That was when we learned the truth about human military planning. While we had been focused on New Denver, thinking it was their main defense, the humans had been preparing something much larger. Captain Harper felt her mouth go dry. She knew what was coming next, but hearing it from an enemy's perspective made it sound even more terrifying. Admiral Susan Blake was the human commander responsible for the sector defense, Zektar said. Our intelligence files described her as a typical human military officer, competent but unremarkable. What our intelligence had missed was that she had been planning for this war for 3 years. The aliens' yellow eyes grew brighter. While we thought the humans were just building colonies and mining operations, they were actually constructing a military network that spanned dozens of systems. Every cargo ship was also a potential warship. Every mining station was also a weapon depot. Every civilian transport was also a troop carrier. He stopped pacing and turned to face the courtroom directly. Admiral Blake had not massed her forces to defend specific targets like any normal military commander would do. Instead, she had scattered them into small groups and hidden them throughout space. When we attacked New Denver, these hidden forces revealed themselves. Zektar's voice grew quieter, more strained. But they did not attack our military forces directly. They attacked our civilization. They poisoned the water supplies on our agricultural worlds. They sabotaged the power systems on our industrial planets. They destroyed the communication networks that held our empire together. The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Several representatives stood up in protest. Such attacks on civilian infrastructure were considered among the worst war crimes possible. The head judge called for order. When quiet returned, he addressed the alien commander directly. Are you saying that humans deliberately targeted non-military installations? Zektar nodded slowly. Not just targeted them. It studied our entire civilization and identified exactly which systems to attack for maximum effect. It knew which food crops we depended on. It knew which factories produced our military equipment. They knew which communication relays were critical for our command structure. The alien scaled skin seemed to darken. Human strike team led by Major Chris Taylor infiltrated our homeworld itself. It's not to destroy cities or kill civilians, but to access our central communication system. They wanted to send a message to every Vorthan in the Empire. Lisa Harper knew about Operation Looking Glass, though most of the details remained classified even decades later. It had been one of the most daring raids in human military history. The message was a recording from New Denver, Zektar continued. It showed the faces of the humans who had died fighting us. Children who had carried ammunition until enemy fire cut them down. Elderly civilians who had operated weapon systems until bombs silenced them forever. Teachers and farmers and shop workers who had chosen to fight rather than surrender. The alien commander's voice became almost inaudible. But it was not a plea for mercy or a demand for justice. It was a promise. The voice on the recording belonged to Colonel Jake Morrison. He spoke directly to our people and told them that this was what happened when you attacked humans. He said that every world we conquered would cost us more than we could afford to lose. Zektar sat back down heavily. The psychological impact was devastating. Our soldiers had been trained to fight honorable battles against worthy opponents. They understood courage and sacrifice. What they could not understand was an enemy that treated warfare as a science to be perfected rather than a ritual to be observed. The alien looked directly at Captain Harper. Your Colonel Morrison's message included something else. Technical specifications for weapons that humans had developed but not yet used. Biological agents that could target specific genetic markers. Nanomachines that could destroy electronic systems. Gravitational weapons that could crack planets. Several judges made sounds of shock and horror. Such weapons were beyond the technology of most galactic civilizations. The message explained that humans had developed these weapons during their own wars against each other, Zektar continued, but they had chosen not to use them against us. Yet, the implication was clear. Surrender now, or face escalation beyond. Anything we could imagine. The alien commander's voice dropped to a whisper. That was when we realized that the humans fighting at New Denver had been holding back. The desperate resistance that had cost us so many ships and soldiers was actually restrained by human standards. They had been trying to minimize casualties, not maximize them. He looked around the courtroom, making eye contact with representatives from dozens of different species. We had thought we were fighting a young species that was technologically inferior to us. Instead, we discovered that we were fighting a species that had survived their own technological adolescence by learning to wage war more efficiently than anyone else in the galaxy. Zektar stood up one more time, his movements slow and painful. Within hours of receiving that message, riots broke out on 17 Vorthan worlds. Our own people were demanding that we end the war immediately. They had seen what humans were capable of, and they wanted no part of it. The alien commander's final words sent a chill through everyone in the courtroom. Our military high command realized that we were not just losing a battle or even a war. We were facing the possibility that our entire civilization might not survive contact with humanity. He sat down and looked directly at the judges. And that was when the humans offered us peace. The courtroom fell into complete silence. The revelation that humans had offered peace terms, while winning decisively, was perhaps the most shocking thing they had heard yet. Captain, Harper closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She knew what came next, and it would be the most disturbing revelation of all. The fourth day of testimony brought the largest crowd yet. To the courtroom on Nexus Prime, representatives from every major species in the galaxy had come to hear Commander Zektar's final revelations. The air was thick with tension as beings, from across the stars, waited to learn the ultimate truth about human warfare. Captain Lisa Harper sat in her usual front row seat, but today she was not alone. Admiral Susan Blake herself had arrived during the night. The elderly human woman sat beside Harper, her weathered face showing no emotion. She wore a simple civilian suit instead of her military uniform, but everyone in the courtroom knew who she was. Commander Zektar entered the courtroom for the final time. The blue-scaled alien looked like he had aged decades in just 4 days. His movements were slow and careful, like someone carrying a heavy burden. When he reached the witness stand, he sat down without his usual pacing and gripped the edges. With his claws, the head judge called the session to order and asked Zektar to conclude his testimony. The alien commander looked out at the packed courtroom, his yellow eyes moving from species to species, before finally settling on Admiral Blake. The peace terms came from General Patricia Stone, Zektar began. She arrived at our command center. In a single unarmed transport ship, no escort, no weapons, no guards. Just one human female walking into the heart of our military operation like she was visiting friends. The alien's voice was barely above a whisper. Our security forces surrounded her the moment she landed. We had enough firepower pointed at her to level a city. She smiled at us and asked if we were ready to discuss surrender terms. Several judges exchanged confused glances. This was not how military surrenders typically worked. We thought she meant human surrender, Zektar continued. Our forces still outnumbered theirs. We still held orbital superiority around New Denver. By all traditional measures, we were winning the tactical battle. Alien commander's claws scraped against the metal stand. General Stone corrected our misunderstanding very quickly. She was not there to surrender. She was there to accept our surrender and dictate the terms of peace. The courtroom erupted in shocked conversations. Representatives from dozens of species talked rapidly among themselves, unable to process what they were hearing. The head judge called for order several times before quiet returned. When it did, Zektar continued in that same quiet voice. General Stone carried with her a complete analysis of our military capabilities, our economic system, our political structure, and our social organization. She knew more about our empire than most of our own leaders did. Admiral Blake shifted slightly in her seat, but her expression remained neutral. The human general explained that the war could continue if we preferred, Zektar said. She outlined exactly what that would mean. Phase 2 would involve targeting our food production systems. Phase 3 would shut down our interstellar transportation network. Phase 4 would collapse our planetary governments through coordinated infrastructure. Attacks. The alien's yellow eyes grew brighter with remembered fear. But she also described Phase 5. That was when humans would stop trying to minimize casualties and start trying to maximize them. She showed us weapon specifications that our scientists said were impossible. Viruses designed to target our specific biology, machines that could convert matter into energy on a planetary scale, technologies that could make stars go nova. Several judges were taking notes frantically. Others sat in stunned silence. General Stone explained that humans had developed these weapons during something they called the Extinction Wars. Zektar continued. Conflicts between different human nations where the goal was not conquest, but complete annihilation of the enemy population. The alien commander looked directly at Admiral Blake. She told us that human military doctrine recognizes 5 levels of warfare. Level 1 is what they call police action. Minimal force to achieve specific objectives. Level 2 is conventional warfare, the destruction of enemy military forces. Level 3 is total war attacks on civilian infrastructure to break enemy morale. Zektar's voice became strained. Level 4 is Extinction War, the complete destruction of enemy civilization. Level 5 is planetary sterilization, the elimination of all life on enemy worlds. The courtroom had become completely silent. Even the background noise from the building's systems seemed to have stopped. General Stone informed us that humanity had been fighting the war at level 2, Zektar said. They could escalate to any higher level at any time. Choice was ours. The alien commander stood up slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. That was when I realized the most terrifying truth about humans. They do not fight wars to win. They fight wars to ensure their enemies never threaten them again. He looked around the courtroom, making eye contact with representatives from every species present. Every other civilization in the galaxy views warfare as a temporary condition. A brief interruption in the normal state of peace, humans view peace as the temporary condition. They see war as the natural state of existence. Admiral Blake spoke. For the first time since entering the courtroom, her voice was calm and clear. Commander Zektar is correct. Humans have been at war with something for our entire recorded history. If we are not fighting external enemies, we fight each other. If we are not fighting each other, we fight nature itself. Conflict is how we grow stronger. The alien commander nodded slowly. The human general gave us 24 hours to decide. Surrender and accept their terms, or face escalation to level 3 warfare. We chose surrender. Zektar sat back down heavily. But the most chilling part came after we agreed to their terms. General Stone thanked us for making the wise choice. Then she said something I will never forget. The alien's voice dropped to barely a whisper. She said that humans preferred peaceful solutions because war was too easy for them. It spent thousands of years learning how to kill each other efficiently. Fighting other species was like fighting children. Several representatives stood up in protest. The head judge called for order, but the alien commander continued speaking. General Stone explained that humans study every species they encounter, not as potential allies or trading partners, but as potential threats that might someday need to be eliminated. They know exactly how to destroy every civilization in the galaxy. Admiral Blake stood up slowly. The commander is correct. We prepare for every possibility because our history has taught us that peace is temporary, but extinction is permanent. Zektar looked at her with something that might have been respect. The peace treaty we signed was not a negotiation between equals. It was a statement of terms from a species that had demonstrated its capacity for unlimited escalation. The alien commander's final words sent chills through everyone present. Humans do not wage war like other species. They wage war like a force of nature. They do not seek to defeat their enemies. They seek to make their enemies cease to exist. He stood up one last time and addressed the entire courtroom. I have served as a soldier for 3 centuries. I have fought against dozens of different species across hundreds of battles, but I have never encountered anything as terrifying as a human who has decided that you are a threat. Commander Zektar looked directly at the judges. My recommendation to this tribunal is simple. Humans should be given whatever they ask for. Whenever they ask for it, because the alternative is not defeat. The alternative is extinction. The alien commander walked slowly toward the exit, his testimony complete. As he reached the door, he turned back one final time. And the most terrifying part of all is that they are still holding back. The courtroom remained silent long after. Zektar had left. Representatives from across the galaxy sat in stunned silence, contemplating a future where humanity was no longer content to remain on the edges of galactic civilization. Admiral Blake gathered her things and stood to leave. As she passed Captain Harper, she paused and spoke quietly. "The commander told the truth," she said, "but only part of it. He never learned what Level 6 warfare looks like." Harper looked up at her superior officer with wide eyes. Level 6. Admiral Blake's expression was unreadable. "There's always another level, Captain. That's what makes us human."